I always thought our family was something unbreakable. Strong, well, as strong as it gets. My twin brother, Michael, our older sister, Sarah, and I were always close, despite all our disagreements. Michael, the perpetual underdog with a heart of gold. Sarah, the perfectionist who always knew best. And I, just me, Daniel, the quiet one who always tried to mediate between them. This went on for 35 years. It took only 1 month for it all to collapse, to turn into a poisonous, foul-smelling wreck. I got the call from the lawyer, Mr. Gardner, last Monday, exactly a week after the funeral of our grandmother, Edith. Grandma Edith. She was the cornerstone, tough but fair, and very rich. She had built a small but successful chain of bakeries, and we all knew the inheritance would be substantial. Us, the grandchildren, and Uncle George with Aunt Patricia. Daniel, I'm calling about Edith's will. Gardner's voice was dry like old parchment. Please come to the office on Wednesday. Just you. Just me? Sounded odd, but I put it down to bureaucracy. I informed Michael and Sarah. Of course, they immediately started speculating. Michael, who had just lost his job and was drowning in debt, said, "She probably appointed you as the executor. Well, that makes sense, you're the most responsible." There was hope in his voice, not for the money, but that this was just a formality and he could soon clear his debts. Sarah, who had always felt overlooked by Grandma, coldly replied, "Just tell me when it's all processed. The main thing is no surprises. We should all get an equal share. It's her duty." I arrived at Gardner's office on Wednesday. His office smelled of old leather and dust. He sat behind a huge desk, and the folder with the will lay before me. I remember the moment. Gardner cleared his throat, put on his glasses, and began to read. The words pierced me like cold needles, one after another. Grandma Edith left her lakeside house to Uncle George and Aunt Patricia, a collection of vintage watches to Sarah, her small country cabin to Michael, all other assets, including stocks, bonds, and bank accounts, totaling $2,200,000. To me, Daniel, I was speechless. My lips went dry. I sat there, stunned, trying to grasp that I had just become a millionaire while my relatives received mere crumbs. And then, Gardner continued, reading a handwritten note from Grandma herself. "Daniel, you have always been the most sensible. You have received everything. But I ask you, share it fairly with Michael and Sarah. I trust your judgment on what fairly means. Make the right choice, my boy. Your grandmother." There it was, the hook, harsh like a punch to the gut. $2. $2 million. Only to me. But with a note that had no legal force yet was, I knew, a moral sentence for me. Grandma had thrown a grenade into our family and asked me to decide who gets the shrapnel. When I left the office, I felt not like a rich man, but a walking target. I called Michael and Sarah, steeling myself. I told them the truth, that I got everything, but there was Grandma's request. Before I could finish talking about fairly, Michael, usually calm, exploded, "Daniel, what does everything mean? Are you kidding? She couldn't have done that. It's a mistake. Or are you hiding something?" Sarah was even worse. Her voice was icy, piercing. "You were always her favorite. She bought you that apartment when you graduated college. You already got your share. Well, now you're rich. Equal split, Daniel. 1,100,000 each. No fairly, just fairness." And so, with one phone call, I turned from a brother and a nephew into a target. An enemy. Michael desperately needs the money, and Sarah demands it as her due. And I sit here with $2 million on paper and a moral bomb entrusted to me by the one person I thought loved us all equally. That was Wednesday. There were 3 weeks left in the month. 3 weeks to divide it fairly. That Wednesday evening, after the lawyer's meeting, felt like the end of the world, not the beginning of a fortune. I remember standing in my kitchen, the one Grandma Edith helped me buy, looking at a plate of uneaten takeout. The silence was deafening, the kind that happens when you know a bomb has been dropped but the dust hasn't settled yet. The total sum was $2,200,000. Sarah's demand for an equal split. $100, 000 each was ringing in my ears. Michael hadn't called back since his outburst. The next day, Thursday, the messages started. Not from my siblings, but from Aunt Patricia. Patricia, Daniel, honey, I know you are under a lot of pressure, but your grandma always wanted to take care of you three equally. Don't let your sister's temper ruin things. You're the sensible one. What are you thinking of doing? It wasn't a question. It was a subtle demand to gauge my intentions. A fishing expedition from the first of the extended family. She and Uncle George had gotten the lake house, which was substantial, but apparently not enough to quiet their interest in the cash. I just sent back, I am thinking, Aunt Patricia. I will do what's right. The real drama started that weekend. Sarah insisted on a family dinner at her place on Saturday. Command, not an invitation. When I arrived, the atmosphere was thick. Michael was there, looking pale and restless. He kept clearing his throat, avoiding eye contact. Sarah, however, was in full performance mode. She had cooked an elaborate meal, prime rib, asparagus, all the trimmings, the kind of meal she only makes when she's about to negotiate a major business deal. We sat down, and the small talk felt like pulling teeth. They talked about the weather, their jobs, anything but the elephant, or rather the $2 million in the room. Then Sarah hit, not with anger, but with precision. Daniel, you drove here in the Audi, right? She asked, buttering a roll with unnecessary force. Yeah, the one I bought 3 years ago, I replied, feeling defensive immediately. Right? And I know your mortgage is practically gone thanks to. Well, thanks to her helping you out back then, she continued, her voice unervingly calm. You're stable. Michael, on the other hand, is losing his condo next month if he doesn't clear his bank's debt. He needs around $400,000 just to breathe. Michael's face flushed. He just looked down at his plate. He hadn't asked me for a penny, but Sarah was using his desperation as a weapon against my stability. So, fairly, Sarah emphasized the word, twisting Grandma's intent. To me, fairly means recognizing who has a need and who already has a cushion. But fundamentally, it also means that the remaining amount must be divided equally. You can't just keep it all because of a sentimental note. I felt the pressure mounting. If I gave Michael the $400,000 he needed, and then split the remaining $1, $8 million equally, it would be $900,000 for me, $900,000 for Sarah, and $400,000 for Michael. That was one scenario. But what if fairly meant taking into account the watches Sarah got, or the cabin Michael inherited? The cabin was maybe worth $150,000. The watches, $50,000 tops. It didn't balance out $2 million. I countered her argument by bringing up the non-cash items. Michael got the cabin, Sarah the watches. We should consider the value of those assets too, right? Sarah laughed. A short, sharp sound that was pure contempt. A rustic shack and some old jewelry versus $2 million liquid dollars. Daniel, don't be ridiculous. That's a distraction. If you want to play that game, we can deduct the money Grandma put into your apartment years ago. Let's see how much you end up owing us. The atmosphere completely changed. It wasn't about fairness anymore. It was about maximizing individual gains and using past favors as leverage. They started calculating every penny I ever received from Grandma. The Christmas gifts, the college allowance, the down payment assistance, all of it was suddenly under scrutiny. Every conversation, every look was weighted. They weren't just my siblings. They were my auditors. I spent the next 2 days, Sunday and Monday, obsessively reviewing Grandma's will, reading that handwritten note again and again. I trust your judgment on what fairly means. Why did she put me in this position? Why not just state the percentages? It felt less like an act of trust and more like calculated cruelty, forcing us to destroy each other. I called my best friend, James, and explained the situation. He just said, "Dude, you're the executor of a moral contract. No matter what you decide, you're going to lose someone, or everyone." The week was winding down. Sarah was now demanding a definite proposal by Friday. Michael remained silent, but his eyes followed me with a mixture of hope and accusation. The pressure was turning the simple act of breathing into a burden. The silence was punctuated only by their continuous, subtle monitoring of my every move, every purchase, every decision. Convinced I was about to hide their money. I felt the tension building, knowing that Friday's deadline would bring the next explosion. Friday arrived, the day Sarah had set her arbitrary deadline. I had spent 2 sleepless nights trying to craft a rational plan. My proposal was this. I would give Michael $500,000 immediately to clear his debt and give him a cushion. Then I would split the remaining $1. $7 million equally between all 3 of us. $566,666 each. This meant I would end up with $566,000, Sarah with $566,000, and Michael with a total of $1,066,666. It was unequal, but addressed Michael's critical need while still ensuring Sarah got a substantial amount. I thought it was fairly balanced. I called them both to meet me at a neutral location, a quiet cafe downtown. It was Monday, the second week of this inherited nightmare. Michael arrived first. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, his clothes wrinkled. He fidgeted constantly, avoiding my gaze until he finally looked up, his eyes pleading. Daniel, I don't want to pressure you, but the bank sent a final notice. I need that money. Please, man. I'm begging you. Just enough to stop the foreclosure. I felt a surge of sympathy and justification for my plan. I know, Mike, and I've worked out a number that I think works. Then Sarah stormed in. She wasn't carrying a purse. She was carrying a stack of papers and a briefcase. She slammed the case onto the table, making the cutlery jump. She didn't even sit down before starting. Don't bother with your number, Daniel. I've done my own calculations, she hissed, her face tight with repressed fury. Your little scheme is obvious. You give Michael a huge chunk to make him grateful, and he split the rest, marginalizing me. It won't happen. It's a clear 3% split of the total cash. Nothing else is fair. I tried to explain my logic. Sarah, fairly doesn't always mean equally. Michael is about to lose everything. He needs a larger portion of the initial funds to stabilize, while you and I are stable. Grandma's note was about judgment, not math. She leaned over the table, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, laced with contempt. Oh, the moral high ground. You're trying to leverage your so-called sensible status into a larger cut of the cash. You're disgusting. But you know what? I have another option. She pulled a document from her briefcase. It was a photocopy of a medical assessment from 3 months before Grandma died. I went through Grandma's files at her apartment, Sarah admitted, not even bothering to hide the fact that she had trespassed and stolen files. I found this. Grandma was hospitalized 3 months ago after a fall. Remember? This is a preliminary doctor's note suggesting mild cognitive decline and occasional periods of confusion. Nothing finalized, but it's something. The air left my lungs. My heart hammered against my ribs. What are you doing, Sarah? Simple, she said, her smile utterly predatory. If you don't agree to the equal split of the cash, $733, $333 each, by the end of today, I'll take this document to Mr. Gardner. I'll argue that Grandma was not of sound mind when she signed the last codicil, the one leaving everything to you with that vague, ridiculous note. We'll tie up the estate in court for years, proving the will is invalid. If the court agrees, the money goes back to the prior will, which splits everything equally among all 4 beneficiaries, including Uncle George and Aunt Patricia. Michael looked up, horrified. Sarah, you can't. That would delay everything for years. I'll lose my place. Sarah didn't even look at him. She was focused entirely on me. Exactly. No one gets anything, Michael. Not for a long, long time. Unless Daniel agrees to the only truly fair outcome. You ruin our lives, Daniel, and I ruin yours. The tension was brutal. This wasn't just about money. It was about destroying Grandma's memory and tearing the family to shreds through legal warfare. Sarah was willing to risk everything, including Michael's stability and the rest of the family's peace, just to force her definition of fairness. She was holding the document like a detonation switch. The 2 million suddenly felt like worthless paper. I was trapped between my brother's desperate needs, my sister's cold-blooded ultimatum, and the fear of letting that document see the inside of a courtroom. I had until the end of the day, and for the first time I genuinely hated my sister. That Monday afternoon after Sarah's ultimatum was the longest, most poisonous stretch of hours of my life. I couldn't risk the lawsuit. If Sarah filed that document, the estate would be frozen for years, and Michael would lose his condo, possibly even his ability to recover financially. The thought of my brother drowning because of my moral stubbornness was too much to bear. Sarah had won by playing the dirtiest possible card. At 5 p.m., I met Sarah at her office. Michael wasn't there. He couldn't stand being in the same room with her, knowing what she was capable of. I brought a simple, typed agreement. We divide the $2 million equally. I stated, my voice flat. 3 ways. $733,333. 33 each. You drop the document. You confirm you will not contest the will under any circumstances once the funds are transferred. Sarah's expression didn't soften. It just became smug. She signed the agreement immediately, securing her share. She then handed me the photocopy of the medical note. Felt flimsy, but the damage it could do was immense. I felt empty walking out. I had betrayed Grandma's trust in my judgment and succumbed to blackmail just to save my brother from a legal mess. I was ready to call Michael, confirm the split, and start the transfer process with Mr. Gardner the next morning. The battle was over and I had lost my dignity, but at least the money would move quickly now. However, the guilt wouldn't let me sleep. That night, I went to Grandma Edith's house. Uncle George and Aunt Patricia had already taken possession of the lake house, but the main city residence was still under estate lock. I had the keys. I wasn't looking for more money. I was looking for closure, for some reason why she had done this to us. I walked into her study, the room she called her war room, where she managed her businesses. I went through the desk drawers one last time. Nothing but old receipts and stationery. I checked the antique globe she loved, nothing. Then, I noticed something odd. A framed photo on her desk, the one of the 3 of us when we were kids, was slightly crooked. I straightened it. As I did, my fingers brushed against the back of the heavy silver frame. It wasn't smooth. There was a tiny piece of thick, glossy paper stuck with scotch taped to the back panel, hidden from view. I carefully peeled it off. It was a small, sealed envelope, no bigger than a postcard, made of the same thick, creamy paper as her official will. Written on it in her elegant, sloping hand were 3 words: read only later. My heart hammered against my ribs again, but this time, not from fear, but from a growing, cold suspicion. This was not a sentimental note. This was a secret. I felt a renewed surge of tension, realizing the battle might not be over. I ripped the seal. Inside was a single, folded sheet of paper. It wasn't signed, nor notarized, but it was written entirely in Grandma Edith's distinct handwriting. I began to read, standing in the silence of her study. Daniel, if you are reading this, it means the vultures descended exactly as I predicted. I knew they would fight over the cash. I gave it all to you because you were the only one who might stop them. I trusted you to make the right choice, which means seeing beyond the $. The $2,200,000 you think you inherited? That money was never mine to give to you. I put the entire liquid remainder of my estate into a private, irrevocable charitable trust exactly 2 weeks before I signed the codicil. The trust is called the Edith's Future Fund for Children's Literacy. All of it. Every last penny. The codicil you received simply named you as the sole beneficiary of my remaining liquid assets and accounts. The only remaining liquid asset at that time was my personal checking account, which contained exactly $4,127.35. The $2 million you saw in the statement was already legally transferred. Mr. Gardner knows. He was instructed to let you believe you inherited the sum and to withhold this information for exactly 1 month, or until you made a formal distribution decision. The air in the room seemed to freeze. I didn't inherit $2 million. I inherited $4,127.35. And I just signed a legal agreement guaranteeing Sarah $733,333 of money that didn't exist. My jaw dropped. Grandma hadn't tested my judgment. She had used my inheritance as a decoy, a distraction, forcing us to reveal our true nature before pulling the rug out from under all of us. The ultimate trick. The ultimate truth. I reread that note from Grandma Edith 3 times, standing in the silence of her study. $4,127.35. That was the extent of my vast inheritance. The entire drama. The accusations, Michael's desperation, Sarah's venomous blackmail, my surrender. It had all been a test using a fictional inheritance as the bait. A cruel, brilliant, and devastating trick. The 1-month timeline she imposed made perfect sense now. She wanted a fast, brutal revelation of character. It was Tuesday morning, the start of the 3rd week. I had to face them. I decided the only way to handle this was to go straight to Mr. Gardner, the lawyer. I showed him the note. He simply nodded, his face unreadable. Your grandmother was very specific, Daniel. She wanted to see what would happen. And she requested I wait until you formally attempted to distribute the major sum to confirm her deepest suspicions about the family dynamic. It appears she was right. He paused, then handed me a check. This is your $4,127.35. The remaining liquid assets. I called an emergency meeting, not at a cafe but back at Sarah's house. I brought Michael. He looked at me nervously, expecting me to confirm the $733,000 split. Sarah was already celebrating internally, the smugness radiating off her. I called you here to finalize the transfer and, well, to explain something. I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I placed the photocopy of the cognitive decline document, the signed agreement from the previous day, and the note from Grandma Edith on the mahogany table. Sarah frowned. What is this, Daniel? Just tell Gardner to initiate the transfer. You signed the agreement. I ignored her. I looked at Michael, whose face was etched with raw need. Michael, I wanted to give you enough to save your condo. I failed. I signed this agreement with Sarah yesterday, giving her 1/3 of the $2. $2 million, to stop her from taking Grandma to court and ruining your life. Sarah cut in sharply. Damn right you did. Now finish this. The money we were fighting over, I continued, pushing the stack of papers towards them. The $2, $2 million, doesn't exist. It was never part of the inheritance. Grandma transferred the entire sum to a charitable trust, the Edith's Future Fund, 2 weeks before she died. She left me $4,127.35, the balance of her personal checking account, and that note. She used the large figure as a test, to see what we would do. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with disbelief and rising fury. Michael was the first to speak. His voice was a broken whisper. You mean, the money is gone? All of it? I lost my place for nothing? His eyes were not accusatory. They were simply defeated, the hope draining out of them, leaving behind a cold, desolate landscape. Sarah's reaction was explosive. She snatched up the papers, crumpling the note and the agreement in her fist. A charitable trust. That old, manipulative witch. She wasted it. She did this just to mess with us. And you, Daniel, you knew this, didn't you? You sat there and let me sign this stupid agreement, and let Michael beg. You are just as bad as she was. She began screaming, truly screaming, not just with anger over the money, but with the humiliation of having been played, of having revealed her worst, most avaricious self for an empty promise. She grabbed her briefcase and stormed out, slamming the door so hard a framed picture on the wall tilted precariously. Michael just sat there. He didn't yell or accuse. He just looked at me, his eyes empty. So, what now, Dan? He finally asked, his voice dead. She got what she wanted. We fought. We showed her exactly who we are. And now I have no money, no home, and I know exactly what my sister thinks of me. I couldn't answer him. I had $4,127.35 in my pocket, and the moral victory of proving Grandma right. But what good was victory when the family, the one thing that was supposed to be non-negotiable, was irrevocably shattered? That was the third week. Michael had to move out of his condo and into a temporary rental I quietly paid for, using my own savings, not the phantom inheritance. Sarah hasn't spoken to either of us. The family dinner, the arguments, the blackmail, it was all a meaningless explosion over a ghost. Grandma Edith's final act didn't leave a legacy of wealth. It left a legacy of bitterness and the stark, awful truth of who we became when the dollar signs appeared. I look at that check sometimes. It's a tiny reminder that the biggest inheritance a family gets isn't the money, but the wounds they inflict on each other fighting for it. And those wounds, they don't heal in a month.